scrutiny, and so it just doesn't happen. Or owners are just power players in a local community. They don't want to upset other power players, like the police, like the local hospital. They literally have dinner with those people, and they don't want to upset them. All of these structural conflicts affect the climate in the newsroom. So that's the ownership piece of it. What about sponsors? Well, because sponsors fund news programming, they write the checks, they can and do exert pressure, even though reporters will always tell you they never feel it. That pressure is there. Now, I have some favorite examples, some emblematic examples that I like to use. One of them is Time Magazine doing a special issue on the environment. And they get a sole sponsor, and that sponsor is the Ford Motor Company. Now, an editor goes on record saying, of course, they're not going to talk about auto pollution, you know? And he said, we don't run airline ads next to stories about airline crashes, you know? So of course they're not going to, when they have a car company, do an environmental issue. Again, we're the only ones left out because we pick up the magazine and we see, oh, a special issue on the environment. We think reporters are making journalistic decisions. What do we need to know about environmental issues at this point? And that's not what's happening. And the fact that he says it out loud, it's not a secret. You know, it's not a secret in the industry, the influence that sponsors have. Different way of slicing it, Coca-Cola sends a letter to magazines saying which sorts of stories they would prefer their ads worth skillions of dollars to run alongside or not to run alongside. They want them next to editorial. They don't want them next to other ads. They want them next to editorial, but only certain kinds of editorial. I'm going to read you this list. Hard news, sex-related issues, drugs, prescription or illegal, medicine, e.g. chronic illnesses such as cancer, diabetes, AIDS, etc., health, e.g. mental or physical medical conditions, negative diet information, bulimia, anorexia, quick weight loss, food, political issues, environmental issues, articles containing vulgar language, religion. Okay, you know, more celebrity swimsuit coverage, anyone, I guess? You know, now when I tell that story, I always make clear, I'm sure some editors got that letter and they crumpled it up and they threw it in the garbage, no doubt. But what I'm trying to suggest is that Coca-Cola was comfortable sending it. You know, that's the climate, that's the situation, that they can say to a magazine, we want what you and I think of as news, they think of as the climate in which their ads appear. Okay? Yes, even public broadcasting, intended as an alternative, but constrained from the beginning by a kind of short political leash and a consequent reliance on the same corporate advertisers as commercial media. The PBS show Nova runs a broadcast on drones that tells viewers that these cutting-edge technologies are propelling us toward a new chapter in aviation history, but not that they're created by Lockheed Martin, major sponsors of the program. Now, I want to add something here, because I think a lot of folks think this is something that we already know. Oh, yes, they just want money. They just want eyes on the set. They want the maximum possible audience. That's not quite it. Media want the biggest possible audience that their advertisers want to reach. And that's not everybody. There's a little-known practice called discounting, which means that sponsors pay less to advertise on shows that reach audiences deemed less desirable. There's a study by the FCC on radio from a few years back that talked about the no urban mandate. That means sponsors refusing to pay full rates or even to advertise at all on stations reaching primarily Black audiences, even when testing shows that the audiences can afford, are able and willing to buy the product being advertised. In one case, a sponsor said, "We just don't want them in our store." So when somebody says, oh, it's not black and white, it's green, it's still black and white.
Follow all the money, I see where it stops. I trace it on its journey from the bottom to the top.
Everything we say, but I don't pretend to be neutral on things like criminal justice reform. I'm for it. Coldplay, I'm against it. Or DeWalt's ladders. They're a seamless blend of style and performance. Walking up one is like ascending to heaven on a golden cloud. I'm not being paid to say that. I'm just a fan. But a healthy media diet has to be broader than that. And unfortunately, the way that many of us consume news now is micro-targeted.
The majority of Americans, 62%, say they get their news from social media. According to Pew Research, 44% of all adults say they get news specifically from Facebook.
That's true. News is now one of the 3 things that we get from social media, the other 2 being our entire sense of self-worth and pictures of shaved alpacas. And fake facts circulate on social media to a frightening extent. You may have seen this quote from Donald Trump online about Republicans being dumb. He never said that. It's not true. Just as it's not true that the Pope endorsed Trump, because of course he didn't. But that story was shared almost 1 million times, which is absurd. Everybody knows the candidate the Pope endorsed was Joe Exotic. They have very similar views on deregulating tiger preserves. Please share this news 1 million times. But there is now a whole cottage industry specialising in hyper-partisan, sometimes wildly distorted clickbait. BuzzFeed News researched sites like Addicting Info on the left and Freedom Daily on the right, both of which have over 1 million followers on Facebook, putting them in the same range as Anderson Cooper 360, and found that some of them were publishing many viral articles containing flat-out falsehoods.
Over 2 weeks, 38% of news on some Republican-leaning Facebook pages was partly or completely false, compared to 19% of news shared on some Democrat-leaning Facebook pages.
Yeah, and before you say, well, Republicans are twice as bad, 19% is still terrible. And it is not news that there is misinformation on Facebook. Just look at the relationship status, it's complicated. The accurate version of that would clearly be, in 3 weeks I'll be single, but I can't admit it yet. But these sites can warp your views pretty fast. Your newsfeed may have been full of the Times and the Post stories about Donald Trump's actual scandals, but many Americans logged onto Facebook every day and saw shit like this. And this cesspool of nonsense would be a problem anyway, were it not for the fact that one of the people enthralled to it is our future president. Back in March, he claimed that a man who had rushed the stage at one of his rallies had ties to ISIS, something that had circulated online and had been found to be untrue. And when that was pointed out to him, this was his response.
There's no ties to ISIS for this man, no law enforcement official, and that this video that you linked to appears to be a hoax.
What do I know about it? All I know is what's on the internet.
Okay, here's the thing. Being on the internet is not a high bar for accuracy. If I edited Wikipedia to say that Diane Weist's real name is Diane Frosted Mini Weist, our next president would believe that to be true. In fact, during the campaign, Trump routinely used his platform to share wildly incorrect information, and even fellow conservatives tried to point out how irresponsible this was.
You tweeted out that whites killed by blacks, these were statistics you picked up from somewhere, at a rate of 81%. And that's totally wrong. Whites killed by blacks is 15%.
Hey, Bill, am I going to check every statistic? I get millions and millions of people.
You got it. You're a presidential contender.
I have millions of people. You know what? Fine. But this came out of radio shows and everything else.
Okay. I got it from radio is maybe the weirdest nonsense explanation I've ever heard. It's like if someone said, this sandwich tastes weird, and you said, but I found it in a hole. If there's something wrong with it, then what was it doing sitting in a hole? And that is the evil genius at work here. Weird conspiracy bullshit has always been bubbling under the surface, but Trump was the first major candidate to harness and fully legitimize it. And it's obvious in hindsight. He came along and told millions of people every crazy email you've ever forwarded was true. And that, at least in part, is why he will be our next president. And to their credit, some Republican lawmakers were calling him out on this during the campaign.
I'm going to tell you what I really think of Donald Trump. This man is a pathological liar. He doesn't know the difference between truth and lies.
He was right. He was just right. But before you think Republicans might now stand up to Trump, I will remind you that by the end of the campaign, Ted Cruz, like many others, not only said he'd vote for Trump, but was doing this.
Hi, this is Ted Cruz calling. I was calling to encourage you to come out and vote on Election Day.
Wow, that is hard to watch. Hi, this is Ted Cruz, just calling to remind you to vote for a man who insulted my wife and said my dad helped kill JFK. Anyway, life has no meaning. Thank you. I want to die. Take care now. God is dead. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. So, there is very little holding Trump back. And remember, in January, he will be sworn into office. And there is another wave of nausea for you. It hits you in small ways and large, doesn't it? For instance, had you considered the fact that portraits of Trump are going to be hanging in our airports? Or that the man who disparaged a Gold Star family will now be expected to comfort the families of fallen soldiers? And maybe you've tried to make yourself feel better, fantasizing that he might Google how much does the president get paid, get depressed and then resign. But that is when you remember Mike fucking Pence, who might be even worse, because he looks like he's from the 1950s, but he thinks like he's from the 1650s. Oh, what's that you say? Her pregnancy was terminated before birth? Well, clearly she's a witch. Hold a funeral for the fetus and throw the mother in a lake. And I know this is all depressing, but it does bring us back to the important question, what the fuck do we do now? And for the record, the answer is not move to Canada. Literally, the only excuse to ever migrate to Canada is if you were born there originally, it's springtime, and you are a goose. That's it. That is it. No, instead, we're going to need to stay here and fight. And not just politically in 4 years when he's up for re-election, but constantly monitoring legislation as it moves through Congress and fucking voting when your legislators come up for re-election in 2 years. But that is still below the barest minimum of what is going to be needed, because for the last 8 years, we've had a president we could assume would generally stand up for the rights of all Americans. But that is going to change now. So we're going to have to actively stand up for one another. And it can't be just sounding off on the internet or sharing think pieces or videos like this one that echo around your bubble. I'm talking about actual sacrifice to support people who are now under threat. So, if you can afford the time or money, support organisations that are going to need help under a Trump administration. For instance, if you're concerned about women's health, donate to Planned Parenthood or the Centre for Reproductive Rights. If you don't believe man-made global warming is a silly issue, donate to the National Resources Defence Council. If you don't think refugees are a terrorist army in disguise, donate to the International Refugee Assistance Project. Oh, and also, given these guys' track record, I would also recommend donations to the NAACP Legal Defence Fund, the Trevor Project for LGBTQ Youth, and the Mexican American Legal Defence and Education Fund. Because that last one would be perfect if your compassion for Latinos goes beyond, say, I don't know, occasionally eating a fucking taco bowl. And do check the box for recurring donations if you can, because this is not a short-term problem. And also, just for a dash, I'll give you just a dash of fun here. I will point out, if you have relatives who supported Trump, you can give money in their name. So consider your holiday shopping this year done. Happy holidays, Nana. The Trevor Project thanks you. And there's one more group that I would single out for help here, and that is the press. Because as we've seen, Trump is a masterful denier of both reality and responsibility. He's a man who would kick you in the nuts and then tell you that your penis did it. So the press is going to face challenges, not just because Trump's chief strategist is Steve Bannon of Breitbart News, but also because of yet another promise that Trump made.
If I become president, oh, do they have problems? They're going to have such problems. I'm going to open up our libel laws so when they write purposely negative and horrible and false articles, we can sue them and win lots of money. We're going to open up those libel laws.
Okay. Well, first, there is no federal libel law for Trump to open up. And as many supposed recipients of Trump's charitable gifts might tell you, you can't open something up if it doesn't exist. But that attitude of punishing the press is genuinely worrisome now that he is going to be president. So instead of sharing partisan memes you found on republicgoofs.redneck and democrappy.cuck, you need to support actual journalism by buying a subscription to outlets like The Times or The Post or your local newspaper, or donating to groups like ProPublica, a non-profit which does great investigative journalism. The point is, if we don't get actively involved to at least mitigate Trump's damage, things will not be okay. And yes,